Loneliness is a slow poison. It creeps in when the house is too quiet, when the sheets on the other side of the bed remain cold, when the only conversations I have are with myself and the empty glass of wine in my hand. I had made peace with my solitude, at least, I thought I had, until the day I noticed him. Jason. I should have never looked at him the way I did. I should have ignored the way his deep brown eyes lingered on me longer than the other students. I should have never allowed myself to wonder what his touch might feel like. But desire is an old enemy, and it always finds a way back. Being a professor was supposed to fill the void. Literature had always been my escape, my comfort. I spent years buried in books, losing myself in love stories and tragedies, convincing myself that passion was something meant only for the pages of a novel, not for a woman like me. My husband had been gone for 3 years. Cancer took him slowly, piece by piece, and I had been left with nothing but memories in a house that echoed too much. At first, I kept myself occupied with work. My students admired me, respected me. But admiration wasn't warmth. Respect wasn't touch. Then came Jason. He was 20, confident in ways I had forgotten how to be. He wasn't like the others who shuffled into class half asleep, scribbling notes they'd never read again. He paid attention to me. He asked questions about my lectures, about the way I interpreted certain passages, but there was something else in his eyes. A knowing. A curiosity that made my pulse quicken. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Just a student eager to impress. But then there was the way he sat at the front, the way his gaze never wavered when I spoke, the way he smiled, a slow, deliberate thing that sent warmth crawling up my skin. And then, today, after the last lecture of the week, I found the note. It was sitting on my desk, folded neatly, the handwriting bold and unfamiliar. You're more fascinating than the books you teach. I'd love to know more about the woman behind the words. J. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced around the empty lecture hall. My fingers trembled as I held the note, my brain battling between common sense and the dangerous thrill curling in my stomach. I should have crumpled it, thrown it away, pretended I never saw it. Instead, I slipped it into my bag. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. I stared at the note for hours that night, reading the words over and over again as if they might change. You're more fascinating than the books you teach. I'd love to know more about the woman behind the words. J. I knew who it was from. There was no doubt. Jason had been watching me in ways no student should, and I had done nothing to stop it. If anything, I had encouraged it with stolen glances, with the way my voice softened when answering his questions, with the way I let his attention linger on me. I should have ignored it. I should have pretended it never existed. But I didn't. Instead, I carried the note with me, tucked inside the pages of my journal like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, I walked into class with my usual composure, pretending nothing had changed. But the moment my eyes met Jason's, I felt the shift between us. He knew I had read it. His lips curled into a knowing smile, and I felt my stomach twist with something dangerously close to excitement. I turned my attention to the lecture, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Every time I moved, I felt his gaze on me. Every time I asked a question, his voice was the first to answer. Every time I stole a glance, he was already looking. By the time class ended, my pulse was unsteady. As the students gathered their things, Jason lingered. He always lingered. "Professor Monroe," he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. I turned, forcing a neutral expression. "Yes, Jason?" He hesitated, then smirked. "I was hoping to discuss my paper with you. Maybe after hours?" My breath hitched. It was a simple request, an innocent enough question, but there was something behind it. Something in the way his eyes held mine, something in the way he stood too close, something in the way the air between us felt charged with unspoken words. I should have said no. I should have reminded him of the boundaries. But instead, I felt my lips part, my resolve cracking like thin ice beneath my feet. "Send me an email," I said, stepping back, trying to reclaim some distance. "We can schedule a time." A slow, knowing smile stretched across his lips. "I will." As he walked away, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was dangerous. This was reckless. This was wrong. But the part of me that had been sleeping for too long, the part that longed to feel something again, was wide awake. That night, an email arrived. Subject: private discussion. "Professor Monroe, you didn't answer my note, but I think I already know your response. You feel it too, don't you? Tell me when and where. I'll be there. J." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could end this now. I could set the boundary, erase the temptation before it took root. But instead, I found myself typing. "Tomorrow, 5 p.m. Coffee house off Main Street." Before I could change my mind, I hit send. Desire has a way of pulling us in, no matter how hard we resist. If you crave more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Some temptations are too powerful to ignore. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around my cup, the warmth doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. What was I doing? I had spent my entire life building a reputation, staying composed, staying in control. And yet, with one note, one look, one simple email, I was unraveling. Then the door opened, and he walked in. Jason spotted me instantly, his lips curving into that same knowing smile. He moved with a confidence I had long forgotten in men his age, controlled, deliberate, as if he already knew the answer to a question I hadn't even asked. He sat across from me, eyes never leaving mine. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "This is just coffee." He leaned in slightly. "If that's what you want to call it." My breath hitched. There was something electric in the air between us, something undeniable, something I knew I should resist but didn't want to. We talked about books, about life, about how he wanted more than what people expected from him. But the words weren't what mattered. It was the way he watched me, the way his fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup, the way he let his knee brush against mine beneath the table. And when I stood to leave, he stood with me. "Let me walk you to your car," he said. I hesitated. "That's not necessary." "But you'll let me anyway." I should have walked away, should have ended it there, but I didn't. We stepped outside, the cool evening air doing little to cool the fire inside me. My car was parked at the far end of the lot, away from the glow of the streetlights. As we reached it, I turned to face him, ready to say something, anything, to break whatever this was before it went too far. But Jason stepped closer, invading the space between us. "You feel it, don't you?" he murmured. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. His fingers brushed against my wrist, light as a whisper. I should have pulled away, should have reminded him of the rules, of the consequences. Instead, I let him touch me. He leaned in, his breath warm against my skin. "Tell me to stop, and I will." I couldn't. And then his lips were on mine. I don't remember how long we stayed there, lost in a kiss that burned through every wall I had ever built. When we finally broke apart, my chest was heaving, my thoughts spinning. "This is a mistake," I whispered. Jason smiled, his thumb grazing my lower lip. "Then why don't you regret it?" I had no answer. Because I didn't. The kiss haunted me. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, reliving the moment over and over again, the heat of his mouth, the way he had held me as if I belonged to him, the quiet challenge in his eyes when we pulled apart. I had broken every rule I had sworn to uphold. And yet, instead of regret, there was something else. Something dangerous. Something thrilling. The next morning, I told myself I would end it. I would walk into class, pretend nothing had happened, and create the distance that should have been there all along. But when I stepped into the lecture hall, Jason was already there, sitting in the front row, waiting. He looked at me like he knew my thoughts, like he had already won. I avoided his gaze as I started the lesson, my voice steady, my hands gripping the podium like an anchor. But no matter how much I tried to focus, I could feel him watching me. Every time I moved, his eyes followed. Every time I asked a question, he answered, his voice smooth, controlled, laced with something only I could hear. And when class ended, he didn't leave. I should have ignored him, should have packed my things and walked out, but instead, I found myself lingering too. "Professor Monroe," he said, standing as the last student exited. "We need to talk." I swallowed, forcing a neutral expression. "About?" He stepped closer. "You know what?" My pulse raced. That was a mistake. Jason tilted his head, studying me. "If that's what you want to tell yourself." I turned away, needing to put space between us. "This can't happen. You know that." But it already did. His voice was quiet, confident, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I gripped the desk in front of me, trying to steady myself. It can't happen again. Jason moved behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence, close enough that his breath ghosted against my skin. "Why not?" he murmured. I closed my eyes. "You know why." He let the silence stretch between us before finally speaking again. "Then say it. Tell me you don't want this." My fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. I should have said it. I should have ended it right there. But I didn't. Because it would have been a lie. That night, my phone lit up with a message. "Jason, tonight. My place. You know where to find me." I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I shouldn't go. I knew better. But my body had a different memory, a memory of his touch, of his kiss, of the way he made me feel alive again. My hands trembled as I typed a response. I can't." A moment later, another message arrived. "Jason, then don't." A simple challenge. A dare. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at those two words, knowing exactly what they meant. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my coat and walked out the door. The drive to Jason's apartment was a blur. By the time I reached his building, my nerves were frayed, my body aching with anticipation and dread in equal measure. I hesitated at his door, my breath shallow. 1 knock. 2. The door swung open. Jason stood there, shirtless, his jeans hanging low on his hips, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, slowly, he stepped aside, wordlessly inviting me in. I knew the moment I crossed that threshold, there would be no going back. But I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. Some lines, once crossed, can never be undone. If you want to see how far this goes, like and subscribe for more. The most dangerous part of the story is yet to come. The moment I stepped into Jason's apartment, the air between us shifted. It wasn't just about attraction anymore. It was about control. About choices. About stepping over a line I had spent my entire life trying to uphold. Jason didn't say a word as he led me inside. His confidence, his quiet certainty, it was intoxicating, pulling me deeper into something I wasn't sure I could escape. I glanced around the small living space, taking in the minimal decorations, the stack of books by the couch, the faint scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. It was a place that belonged to someone at the beginning of their life. And yet, standing here, I felt like I was the one just waking up. Jason stood beside me, watching, waiting. "You can leave," he said, voice low. "I won't stop you." He was giving me an out. A final chance to walk away before this became something we could never take back. But I didn't move. Because for the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt wanted. And even though I knew it was wrong, even though I knew the risks, I couldn't ignore the pull between us. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. "We both know I'm not leaving," I whispered. Jason's lips parted slightly, as if he had expected me to say something else. But then, a slow smile spread across his face, and just like that, the last of my restraint crumbled. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting golden streaks across the room. I sat on the edge of Jason's bed, wrapped in a borrowed sweatshirt, staring at my reflection in the window. I had done it. I had crossed the line. And now, there was no going back. Jason stirred beside me, his hand brushing against mine. "You're thinking too much," he murmured. I let out a soft laugh. "That's all I ever do." He propped himself up on his elbow, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "Do you regret it?" I swallowed, turning away. "I don't know." Jason reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "You don't have to figure it out right now." But I did. Because the world outside this apartment was waiting. And it wouldn't be kind. The drive home was filled with questions I didn't have answers to. What would happen next? Could I pretend nothing had changed? Would Jason expect more? Would I? By the time I pulled into my driveway, my stomach was in knots. I was about to step inside when my phone buzzed in my purse. "Jason, thinking of you." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. I was in too deep. And I wasn't sure I wanted to find my way out. Days turned into weeks, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't stay away. The secrecy, the thrill, it became an addiction, a dangerous game I couldn't stop playing. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. And when the truth came crashing down, I was forced to face the consequences of my choices. Because love, passion, and desire, they all come with a price. And I was about to find out if I was willing to pay it. Every secret has its price, and every story has an ending. If you've been captivated by this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping tales. Because sometimes, the most dangerous temptations are the ones we never see coming.